Is that working? So if I don't have the clicker, do I just have to wink at somebody to get the... Oh, I see. Oh, well, that takes all the fun out of it. Morning, and thanks for the introduction. That was actually most of my presentation there. So I'm Bryan Cosgrove. I'm not an arborist. I'm a geographer by training. As was said, my role at City of Trees is really about using spatial data to develop green infrastructure plans, specifically to make a business case, to try to get money out of people who would fund these things if only they had the evidence to prove that it was going to work, or that it was in the right place. So that's what I attempt to do. Just a little bit about City of Trees. So we were originally set up as one of the community forests, but as local authority funding has diminished over the years, we've changed our focus, and we've become a fully independent charity now with much more of a private sector focus. And we really consider ourselves as being the centre of a movement in Greater Manchester that's trying to connect people with nature through trees and woodlands. There we go. There's just some of our partners there, just to show off that we are very private sector focused. So, as Tony said as well, we have a target to plant 3 million trees within a generation. So that's a tree for every person in Greater Manchester. We also have a target to bring back 2,000 hectares of existing woodland back into active management. Now that target there is actually a fairly scientific target. So that's based on how much woodland we have that doesn't have a management plan attached to it. But the 3 million trees is really more of a campaigns-led target, and it's a numeric target, just going back to some of the discussions this morning. And I want to come back to that later on, so if I forget, will somebody remind me that I need to come back to that point about the target. As Tony also said, so City of Trees, as well as being a movement, is also the Greater Manchester part of the Northern Forest, so the initiative to try to accelerate tree planting in the north of England. And you can just see Manchester, Greater Manchester over on the left-hand side. I should also say a little bit about what Greater Manchester is. So Greater Manchester is a city region of just shy of 500 square miles. It comprises 10 individual local authority districts and one combined authority that sits over the top of them. It's a political beast. There's all kinds of interesting politics between the combined authority and the districts, and between the districts as well. And keeping or having a strategic direction and maintaining records for an area this size and this complicated is quite a challenge. And so one of the ways we try to overcome that at City of Trees is by convening the GM Forest Partnership, so Greater Manchester Forest Partnership. So this is a non-statutory advisory board, think tank, if you like, of officers and members from each of the 10 districts, as well as representation from the Forest Commission, Woodland Trust, and Natural England. And we enjoy some political support, hence the picture of Andy, as we call him in Greater Manchester. So one of the things that we decided, I think this is the discussion has been taking place over a number of years, but it was quite clear last year that we really needed to develop a tree and woodland strategy for Greater Manchester, to set out the case, really in one place, make the case for protection and expansion of our trees and woodlands, and catalyse a bit of action. And we wanted this to be an overarching strategy. So this was a strategy for the whole of Greater Manchester, which could then be plugged into, or could then, the individual districts could hang their own local plans from it and refer to it and use that as an umbrella. So it couldn't be too prescriptive, it needed to be informative, but it had to have some general policy statements in there, and most of all, it had to be evidenced. So it was agreed that the starting point for that was that we really needed to have a decent baseline for what we already had. I should say as well that Greater Manchester has wholeheartedly adopted the natural capital approach, so viewing all of our environmental assets, as capital assets, and working with DEFRA directly on the Urban Pioneer, they've developed a natural capital investment plan, As well as that, at the Mayor's Green Summit earlier this year, they announced an environment fund, Greater Manchester Environment Fund. And those two things ensure that any decisions about funding for the natural environment will necessarily have to be communicated in terms of natural capital. So our baseline for our tree and woodland strategy, it clearly had to be able to communicate the benefits of trees and woodlands in terms of their cash value as well. We already had, since 2010, we undertook, or we coordinated on behalf of GM, the Greater Manchester Tree Audit. So this is basically hand-drawn on blue sky aerial photography, and that gave us a fantastic picture that we hadn't previously had of just how much woodland we had, how many trees outside woodland we had. And that told us we had about 11 million trees, thereabouts, and a load of blocks of woodland that we couldn't count the individual trees within. And it showed us where it was, how much of it there was, but it didn't tell us what it was doing, it didn't tell us what it was, it didn't tell us how healthy it was, it didn't tell us what benefits we were getting from it. Also, it's very much out of date, so 2019 to 2010, we needed to do something else, so this wasn't going to be a suitable baseline. So we were put onto the idea of iTree. Now I know a lot of people in here are quite familiar with iTree, so I'm not going to go into the bones of this and how it works, but I do need to say a little bit about how we used it, and I think our thank you to Keith for actually encouraging City of Trees to use this tool. We had a look at it, and we knew that the scale of the challenge, or the task, was going to be quite a big one, and we weren't really sure that we were ready for that, and we certainly didn't have the money to do the work either. So we wanted to have a little play around with the tools and just see what it was all about. So the first thing we did was use iTree Canopy. And this was great fun. Around about the same time, so this is winter last year, and I think it was Winter Watch they'd promoted a survey that was being put out there by RSPB. They were trying to find out how many kittiwakes we had on our coastline, and they were using a very similar piece of technology that allowed users to be given an aerial photograph, and then they could choose whether or not an individual bird on a cliff was a kittiwake or just a fulmar or some other bird. And that was how they were trying to undertake this massive task of surveying our entire coastline. And so on the back of that, it was a very easy sell. We put this out on our social media and through our newsletter, and we put the shout out, and I bundled up Greater Manchester into 200 and odd different council wards and shipped them out to 100 or so volunteers who came forward. And this is like a computer game for people who don't really play computer games, if you haven't used it before, because you just have to, you're presented with a cross and you just have to say, is this a tree or not, tree or not, tree or not, tree or not. And the aim of the game is to bring the standard error down as low as you can. And I told people that I didn't want them to be clicking any longer than about 500 clicks. I didn't want them to be spending days and days on this. But some of our people got really into it, and some people were going up to 800, 900 clicks on this thing, so bringing the standard error right down. So we got what I think was some pretty good data out of this. And that's the whole thing now. So that's now presented on Forest Research's UK canopy cover map. And it looks a lot like, or it looks exactly as we expected it to. So we've got the open areas of moorland up on Oldham and Tameside, up to the northeast. We've got the bare areas, or the treeless areas anyway, I should say, of the mosslands down to the southwest. And then you've got very leafy areas like Stockport and parts of Bury. And it looks a lot like we thought. So we were quite happy with that, and we were quite happy with the level of engagement we got with that. We thought we had something good. People really cared. They wanted to get involved in Greater Manchester's trees, and they were behind what we were trying to do. So again, with a bit more gentle encouragement, but no funding still yet, we decided to take the plunge and go all out with iTree Eco. So this was the tool that was going to really tell us, or so we hoped, what the whole structure and the function and the value of Greater Manchester's forest canopy was going to be. But the scale of the task was absolutely extraordinary. So each of these pink crosses is one of our sample points. to get data that was going to be reliably reportable at each of the district levels. So we couldn't just, I should say, we took quite a lot of advice from Jim Smith at the Forest Commission, and we learned a lot from the challenges that they'd encountered. And one of the things we definitely wanted to be able to do was report a figure, not just at the GM level, but at each of the district levels. Not just for political reasons, but just for practicalities of actually being able to do something with the information. So to get data that was going to be reliable at that level of granularity, 10 different districts, we needed to do about 2,000 sample points across GM. Now, these are all randomly assigned points on a grid. I should say, out of fairness, that the Oldham Council had already undertaken a survey for their borough the year before, so we were able to just kind of swipe their data and bring that into our bigger picture. But still, it was 2,000 points. So that involved us recruiting. I mean, I should say as well that we got training and support from Tree Economics, Exeter's finest. Are they in the room, or have they skipped out for my bit? No, they've gone. So thank you to Kenton and team for the training we got for that. So we were able to train then ourselves. We were able to train a team of about 60 surveyors. So we used interns. We didn't want to use too many volunteers, although we did get some volunteers. We used paid interns because we wanted to make sure that we had people who were going to be committed to the project and reliably there throughout. Although there was some turnover over the summer, we did lose some people, and we had to train people in batches. The other thing was that we had to make sure that we only started this in May or June because we were so nervous about starting it. We need to make sure that we needed to get the whole thing done before the last leaf fell off. So we were praying for a very storm-free autumn, which luckily we got. I should say also that we had to be faithful to the random nature of the design of the survey. So if there were any sites we couldn't get to, and there were many that we couldn't actually get access to, people, because we were doing the surveys in the daytime, and people were knocking on people's houses to get into back gardens. But those people were at work, and there was no amount of going back would get us into those properties. So we had to make sure that we had lots of backup plots so that we could do like-for-like replacements on the land cover type. And there was a whole load of stories. There's a whole book's worth of stories that the surveyors got from doing that work, of scrapes that they got into, climbing over fences. Maybe they oughtn't to have been doing, but anyway, a lot of fun was had, and I think everyone that was involved in that survey has gone on now to work in the sector or in a related sector, taking all of that experience with them, and I think they've all done very well out of it. Anyway, this was just a really quick one just to show you how, I just wanted to see how they compared. Having done all of the work, we got all of the data in, we crunched it all through, and I wanted to compare them. So I wanted to compare iTree Canopy with iTree Eco with the GM tree audit that we'd already done 10 years before. And there's some variation in there, but I actually think that they compare pretty well. And particularly in the case of Wigan, we'd actually been reporting Wigan's tree cover for years as being about 10%. And it was only when I started to examine the iTree data, which was coming out more like 20, that I thought there's something wrong here. And it was our calculations. We'd completely messed up with our tree audit data, and there was a spreadsheet that we'd just kind of miscounted something. So it actually helped us then to completely change. Wigan got 10% more trees than they'd had before, so I think they were quite happy with that. So we were happy. We were really happy that this was telling us something. It was meaningful and it was reliable, and we were quite happy then to accept the other elements of the data, the results. So these are just some of the headlines then. So it told us that we had about 11.3 million trees. That tallied well with what we already thought, so that was great. We were happy with that. 15.7% tree cover. I think we've been reporting it at 15.8, so that's great. We were happy with that. Most common species is the hawthorn. That was a complete surprise to everyone, but there it is, with sycamore and English oak coming afterwards. So the trees are removing about 847 tonnes of pollutants. This is a completely meaningless figure, but in an attempt to try to work this into something more relevant, I worked out that this was about 2,000 cars doing an average of 15,000 miles each per year. So we have many more cars than that, but that to me was quite impressive. And 1.6 million cube of stormwater runoff avoided. So that's all water that is not overwhelming Greater Manchester's ageing combined sewer system, which is really interesting to United Utilities, our utilities provider, who actually funded a lot of this work. And of interest to the Mayor, for the Greater Manchester's carbon commitments, 56,000 odd tonnes of carbon locked away each year, with 1.5 million tonnes of carbon locked away right now. This gave us a value of a total value just for those services, so just for looking at the carbon sequestration, the water, stormwater interception, and the air pollutant removal, a figure of 33 million per year benefits to the Greater Manchester economy by having those trees there. That's just those benefits that we were counting using iTree. So these headlines are, this has given us real good information that we can take to strategic meetings and to funders, and people have really sat up and paid attention. We've already started to publish these since we finished the work last year. People have really been sitting up and paying attention, and we've been able to get into a lot of strategic meetings on the back of some of these headline data, particularly this one. So this was looking at how many ash we had in our population and how many horse chestnut. Our comms officer wasn't happy that we only had 800,000 ash in the population, because that didn't sound good enough when we talked about 800,000 trees dying. So she wanted me to add the horse chestnuts in there as well. So that got us up to that figure of 1 million. So it's a little bit contrived, but it does the job, it does the trick, and it is based on real data. But behind all of these headlines, which have been terribly useful, and we've got a lot of media coverage out of this as well. We've been on the radio, and we've had the TV come to interview us about all of our work, not just the strategy document. But behind all of that, there's a wealth of real useful data then, really good, rich data that tells us exactly what the makeup of our forest is. Things like the leaf area dominance. So although we've got, I said hawthorn are our most numerous tree, they're way down the pecking order, where are we, in terms of the dominance value, which is up here by sycamore. So we know that actually in terms of our leaf mass, it's sycamore that's doing all the work for us in terms of the ecosystem service. That's what's doing all of the shading and the interception of water and air pollution, not the hawthorn. So that gives us real good information to help inform restocking decisions. Looking at the health of our trees, what's this one here? I'm squinting at this one. So looking at our English oak, it looks as though they're not all that healthy as a population across Greater Manchester. So that gives us real information. There's something that we need to do there differently. Likewise, the ash, they're not great at the minute. We know that they're suffering. We know a lot of the ash in Greater Manchester already are suffering from ash dieback. So all of that has then gone into this strategy that we've been working on. So this is a rough presentation of what it looks like. So it basically comprises 4 sections, 4 distinct volumes almost. So the first volume is the strategy. What is the case we're making? What are we going to do about it? What are the actions? What are the policy statements that we want each of the local authorities to adopt into their own local plans? And the targets. I will remember to mention the targets. The next section then, so part 2, is all about the evidence base. So that's what we've all gone through there. That's all of that iTree stuff. What have we got? Where is it? What's it doing for us? The third section, and I probably should have spent more time on this for this audience maybe, is all about where do we need more trees. So if we've got a target of 3 million, where should they go? If people are going to give us money for it, how can we demonstrate that the money they've given us for tree planting has gone to the very best use? And so I'll come on to that in a second. And then the final section is guidance and standards. So we wanted to have one place where all the development managers across Greater Manchester could refer developers to this single source of information that itself referred out to statutory documents, TDAG documents, all of the stuff that we know is useful, but have that all compiled in a single place that was a single document. And this is the way we do trees in Greater Manchester. Just going back then to that section 3 then, so where do we need more trees? So this is moving away from all of the iTree stuff. This is a bit of a separate exercise, and this was really looking at how Greater Manchester were doing things in terms of ecosystem service appraisal. I was looking at the ecosystem services that they were interested. So as well as carbon, they're very much interested in water. We've got real severe surface water management issues in Greater Manchester. We have severe air quality issues in Greater Manchester. And we also have a looming, believe it or not, heat island issue facing Greater Manchester, and we felt some of that this summer. We really did. And so this was an attempt at saying, right, if we're making the case, if we're saying that trees do all of this stuff for us, where do we have the greatest need for these ecosystem services? Right, and then in these areas, where actually could we plant a tree? Where could we put those trees? So starting with some detailed ordnance survey mapping, we produced a base map that was plantable land. So this is land where, if we had the permission, we could definitely put a tree here. So if it's a car park, yeah, absolutely, we can put some trees into there. If it's a wide pavement, we can definitely put a tree in there. If it's green space, we can put trees in there. If it's a railway, we can't. If it's a building, we can't. If it's a road, we can't. And if it's a protected habitat, we can't. So this is our base map. So we starting with this plantable land. We then overlaid that with the different data sets that indicated where the need was for the ecosystem services that trees could provide. So this is a air quality map, DEFRA background modelled PM 2.5 concentration map for Greater Manchester. And for those of you who know the city region, you can see quite clearly the motorway network stands out there as well as the city centre. Not very surprising. What I was able to do then was set a threshold on that map and say, right, show me all of those areas that are likely to be experiencing on a regular basis PM 2.5 concentrations in excess of 10 micrograms per cubic metre. Not a legal threshold, but the threshold at which the World Health Organization say, above this, your children are all going to suffer with bronchial disorders issues. So I've taken that. So that's what the brown blobs are. I don't know if it's all that clear on this map. And then I've overlaid that with the plantability map and said, right, in these areas of poor air quality, where could we roughen this surface up? Where could we put carefully designed trees into this landscape? So just to zoom in on this one. So this is an area in Bolton, of the town centre. So all of those green blobs that intersect that brown blob are areas that are either green space or hard space that could, in theory, have trees on them. The very dark bits there are those plantable surfaces that are within 100 metres or so of a primary school. Now, I thought that was particularly important, that we brought that out, that we were saying that, that if what we're trying to do is protect children from poor air quality, then let's focus on those places. Let's give that a real high priority. Because we were asked time and time again by the combined authority, where am I going to get my bang for my buck? So this is what we thought. We hope this is what's answering that question. I should say as well, we don't want to over-egg it. We know that we can't solve air quality issues with trees, but we know that they can go a long way to helping, especially if we design them correctly. And we're working with researchers to make sure that we have that understanding and that knowledge in place. And I'll just speed through the rest of these. And this is looking at herb and heat island. So this is taking a map that was produced by the University of Manchester a couple of years ago now, actually. But not a lot has changed, other than there's more of our built environment than there was then. Manchester's growing at a rate of knots. So all of the red and orange areas are areas where we think we are likely to see daytime temperatures in exceedance of 30 degrees C by 2050. Now, 30 degrees C is a good threshold or a useful threshold because this is the point at which the NHS start to deploy heat stress resources. So anything above that, that's cash being spent. And so all of the green blobs, just with before, that's all the plantable spaces all the plantable spaces that intersect those hot areas. So that's just a useful map. So that's giving us a score there for Heat Island. This is looking at surface water flooding. So using some United Utilities data and LiDAR data, we were able to draw sub-catchments or watersheds, mini watersheds, around all of the areas that are experiencing the worst surface water flood risk. Surface water flooding right now. Looking at well-being, mental health and well-being. So using indices of multiple deprivation, we worked out, or we found those areas, those lower super output areas, where we've got the worst levels of attainment, the worst physical health, and where we expect we'll get poor mental health as well. And so these are all the plantable spaces there, so we can try to improve people's physical environment not only because the trees look good and improve the look of the area, but so that the people living there can get involved in the planting of them and the management of them, we hope. So all of those maps then, they all stack together, they all combine. There are about 16 of those according to 6 different ecosystem services to produce something that we hope answers that question of where should we be planting our 3 million trees. So you can see here, I haven't got the hang of this at all. So this is blue. It doesn't mean don't plant a tree. It means you can plant a tree. But where it's red, it just means that you're going to deliver more, or there's the potential to deliver more ecosystem services with trees that are planted there, or rather meet more needs that a tree could deliver. And it's not really a surprise to me, looking at this map, that Deansgate, the busiest road in the centre of Manchester, comes out as being a massive opportunity. You can't see that when you're looking at the landscape scale, but when you zoom in, you can see that the pavement there, because this is an area of terrible air quality, high noise, surface water flooding. It's a retail area, so planting trees there is undoubtedly going to improve that and improve the prospects of that area. So I think that's all I'm going to say about that section there. I think maybe it was just to go back to the target again. I think maybe that's a good point to remember it. We've now got this document. This is in draft. I have until Friday to complete it. We went around the houses a great deal. I said earlier that target was a campaigns-led target. It's not really an evidence target. And we had an awful lot of debate in Manchester, Greater Manchester, about whether we should have a canopy-based target or a numeric target. And this has rolled on, and it's still not quite been put to bed yet. I think that some people would still like us to have a canopy target. But we decided to stick with it. We decided to stick with our 3 million numeric target. Even though we were expressing what we already have as canopy, what we wanted to do with this strategy was to really catalyse action. We didn't want to say that if we get to 40% tree cover, job done, it's all great, we can just sit back. We wanted this to be an ongoing process. We wanted this to describe our relationship with the forest canopy in Greater Manchester. So we kept to our campaigns-led target of 3 million because this was a figure that we could count. We could count every tree as it went in. As every new development went up in the centre of Manchester, we could liaise with the developers and we could get figures and the planning authorities, and we could get figures for how many trees were being planted. So we could actually count that and we could see how we were doing towards that. Also, because the canopy, we wouldn't be able to measure any difference in the canopy until the end of the strategy. This is a 25-year strategy, I should have said. And we wouldn't be able to measure that in any meaningful way until the end of that 25 years. So we're going to stick with that 3 million target for now. We're definitely not saying that if we meet that 3 million, we're done. The Northern Forest has a target of 50 million. Now, that isn't all going to happen in Greater Manchester. There just isn't the space. But we're going to do as much as we can, and we're going to keep an eye on that target and keep working towards that. So our next steps for this document then are, as I said, I've got to finish it on Friday. That's my absolute deadline for staring at it and trying to tweak it. We're already working with, and we've already been presenting this to, a number of different strategic partnerships and organisations across Greater Manchester. And so our next stage is to really make sure that this is embedded in the resilience strategy at Greater Manchester, and the infrastructure strategy, and the GM spatial framework, because we want to make sure that this is embedded in all of the elements of the planning system in Greater Manchester. And that's it. I think that's it.